the polling system, one of the biggest staples of old school RuneScape, and a marvel of gaming, I guess, if you want to put it that way. Definitely, certainly something that is quite unique to old school that you don't really see in many, if any, other games to begin with. But we need to ask ourselves, is that actually good? Is the polling system in old school good? I mean, at the end of the day, you don't see it anywhere else, and maybe there's a reason for that. So, in this video, that's exactly what we're going to explore. So first of all, we need to understand why polls even exist to begin with. I know that a lot of people like to say that polls exist so players get get a say in the updates that come into the game, but that's not entirely true. Players can easily decide what comes into the game without even needing to poll it. Mainly because Jagex right now only polls things that the community has agreed on already. So there's a lot of feedback, there's a lot of back and forth when it comes to suggestions when an update is coming out. Case in point, the new skill. The new skill wasn't just polled and it's either coming into the game or isn't. People are still discussing what the skill is going to be and what not. Jagex entailed what a skill could be or what not, depending on, if the skill passed the poll or not. Even before, should we get a new skill, poll came about, into the poll, I guess, right? Even before people voted, Jagex was already discussing that. So players have a big input into what the game gets and how the game gets it even before the thing is polled. So why do polls actually exist? And the answer is pretty simple. The polling system exists purely to give the players a perception that they have power over the game. I mean, sure, at the end of the day, they do have some power over the game, but the vast majority of people doesn't actually vote on polls. I mean, Jagex says that only an average of 6% of people actually vote on polls that are eligible to vote on polls, and that's very, very far from the majority. And look, yes, a lot of people are always not going to bother voting on things. That's just, democracy in general. But 6% is extremely low, and I would bet that from a lot of these 6%, a lot of them are high-leveled accounts and players that play the game a lot. So, in reality, the game is actually being decided by the top players, not so much, the entire player base to begin with. And that's the thing. The polls exist not to give players power, but rather for players to feel like they're in control of the game. Because the reason as to why old school has polls is because players don't want a repeat of EOC, which is the reason as to why old school even exists in the first place, and the removal of the wilderness and free trade. Those are the two biggest updates that get cited when you ask people why we should have polls. They just don't want a repeat of those updates. And while I understand that, in nowadays gaming landscape, those updates wouldn't really come out, at least not the way they did anymore. In today's gaming landscape, there's so many games out there that companies don't really want to lose their player base, and on top of that, with websites like Reddit or Twitter or YouTube, email forums, whatever, there's so much feedback already going on between devs and players in many games, not just RuneScape, that updates like those wouldn't really come out anymore. When those updates came out, the gaming industry was entirely different. I mean, for you to have an understanding of what I'm talking about, EOC came out over 10 years ago at this point. So, yeah, the gaming industry was entirely different at that point, right? So, at the end of the day, while it's good that players feel like they have power over the game, most of the times these type of updates aren't going to happen, and quite frankly it's not like a poll is going to be the only power that a player has. While this wasn't an update on the game itself, players can display a sense of power by just unsubscribing from the game, and this is exactly what happened with the 117 HD plugin. He wanted to release the plugin, Jagex said no, and people unsubscribed. And then not even 24 hours later, Jagex was like, oh, actually, we're reverting our decision. And the plugin exists in the game. That was never polled. It was something that, people never really discussed before. It was just like, no, we want this in the game and we unsubscribe otherwise. And it came into the game. Players have far more power than just, polls. And the thing is, even the polls themselves and the content that gets polled isn't that good to begin with either. At the end of the day, when it comes to updates like quality of life updates, why do they need to be polled? Stuff like, oh yeah, should you need the Glariel's amulet equipped to access the Waterfall Fire Giant dungeon after the Waterfall quest is completed? It's like, why don't you just make that update happen? You know, like, why do you need to poll every little thing about the game? I think that this creates a fatigue when it comes to people voting on polls because there's so many that people just feel like, what's the point on voting in them, right? And even the votes themselves and the content itself oftentimes really suffers from polling. Not just in the fact that oftentimes, due to the polling system, updates actually take longer than what they should to come out. Oftentimes, the update is ready, or the update could be worked on, but Jagex isn't working on it because, well, it's still being polled, and we don't know if people are voting yes or no on it, right? But also in the sense that oftentimes people get tired of an update and people aren't even going to bother checking out an update because they've already heard about it so much before it even came into the game that people just don't want to check it out. Like, for example, the new Wilderness boss rework. We knew that this was coming for months. People have talked about it, Jagex has discussed it a bunch, Jagex has discussed all of the rewards that when it was released into the game, it felt like the update had been in the game for ages, you know, months, if not years at that point. So a lot of people that really never had interest in it didn't even bother actually going to check it out. A lot of updates just don't feel that magical, or, you know, they don't have that sense of wonder that a lot of players want to have. And I mean, it's pretty clear that the vast majority of players doesn't even care about polls or having control over the game. Again, most players just really want to feel like they have control in the game, when in reality they just play the game as if it was, you know, 2007 again, where they just wait for a new update to come in, they check it out, they have fun with the game, and that's pretty much it. And at the end of the day, yeah, it's not the player's job to know or to, you know, balance the game or choose what comes into the game or not. It's not our job to decide that. I mean, I'm paying for, you know, to play the game. I would expect that Jagex is the one doing that at the end of the day. And because of the polls, it's like it feels like they're not the ones doing that. So it feels overall really just it feels that the polls just clog up the game so much and clog up potential updates that, you know, at the end of the day we could have that we don't have, that, you know, it's just the plates are just delayed as a whole as well, and, you know, it's just overall it feels really bad. So yeah, I mean, what's left to discuss is, should we then just remove the polls from the game? Should we just say it, hey, you know what, they're no longer useful? Well, I mean, I think that for better or worse, polls are a staple of the game at this point, right? You know, I think that while there's a lot of negatives relating to it, I think that there also could be a lot of positives. And the fact that players are more engaged with the content than in other games, you know, can also be a good thing because, yes, a lot of the updates that come into the game are far more player favored as opposed to just, you know, developer favored. You know, and players and sometimes do know what they want to engage with and how they want to engage with it. So polls can be good. You know, I just hope that polls, first of all, that there would be way less polls as a whole, like, you know, maybe once a month, you know, and that polls would be less complicated. I'm gonna be honest, you know, it's much easier to vote on a poll that has one question than a poll that has 30. And, you know, there have been polls before that have more than 30 questions available in it to vote on. So, you know, I think that overall making polls less frequent and making them more simple for people to vote on not only is going to engage more people to vote on them, but at the same time, you don't really lose anything, since most of the plates that already come into the game get discussed so much before being pulled that you might as well just pull everything together, you know, and then later on fix it down the line if it needs fixing, because it's not like when an update comes into the game it never gets fixed. You know, oftentimes Jagex rebalances things, they rework things, they fix things. So all in all, I think that, yeah, polls are just a staple of the game. They bring a lot of negative, but I think that they can also be quite positive for the game. I just wish that, you know, we actually have more stuff when it comes to the questions in the polls per se, or like that there were less questions that involved more stuff in the question itself, so it doesn't feel like a chore to engage with it and to vote on polls. But yeah, I mean that's pretty much about it. They're sort of there, and I really hope that they can be improved further in the future, and that more people do get involved within them, because again, if this is supposed to be the players deciding the future of the game, 6% of the player base deciding the future of the game doesn't sound too good for me.